Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome you after lunch to the last session for the day. We have our speaker with us, Dr. Pariza Delchidana, who is going to talk on innovation transformation. And to introduce ma'am and chair her session, we have a very senior faculty, of course, from our own institute, Dr. Mala Menon, who is now working as adjunct professor, Bombay College of Pharmacy. Ma'am, welcome you to the platform and over to you.
Thank you, Vivek, for the introduction. And it is a great pleasure to be here in this session to introduce Dr. Parizad Elchidana. Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Parizad is a well-known person both in industry as well as in academia. In fact, she is somebody who bridges a gap between industry and academia. I think she has a very long career in the pharma industry. I will just uh, give a brief introduction to Dr. Parizad. I think I will need her slide. Yeah. I think first is academics. Dr. Parizad has completed her BPharm and MPharm from Mumbai University, subsequently PhD in pharmaceutical sciences. Then she has done post-graduation specialization in pharmaceutical technology from State University of Ghent, Belgium. She has many other qualifications and training. She has trained as internal auditor for ISO 9000 quality management systems. She has two diplomas, one in business management and in computer science. So she has all the accomplishments as an academician and also to gear up in the industry. Professional sphere, Parizad has around 36 years experience in global generic pharmaceutical industry. She specializes in R&D, especially of patent non-infringing products and processes and quality management systems. She has an expertise in startups and setting up and managing greenfield projects on behalf of foreign investors. And in this capacity, she had provided her expertise about 2 years ago to a Dubai-based startup company, Pharmax Pharmaceuticals, as chief technical officer, where right from the facility setting to qualification and regulatory approvals, she had handled. And in fact, there she was directly reporting to the health ministry of Dubai. Uh, her many years in the industry, she has worked with various companies. She started with Dufar Interferon, then she was with Merind. She is ex-managing director of IVAX India, followed by Apotex Research Private Limited, which is the Indian arm of a #1 generic pharmaceutical company in Canada. Next slide. Now, currently, Parizad is with ACG Worldwide. She is principal technical consultant, pharma, and responsible for handling and overseeing technical projects and also providing support on due diligence for proposed investments or buyouts. She has delivered numerous global FTF, NC1, and 505(b)(2) submissions through innovative ideas in all her various jobs, followed by successful commercialization. She has several patents and research publications to her credit. Parizad has a deep understanding and knowledge of quality by design and artificial intelligence related to product and process development and analysis. Uh, Now, as I said in the beginning, Parizad is a connect with academia, serving to bridge the gap between industry and academia. Throughout her industrial career, she remained close to academics. She has been an honorary visiting faculty and is currently on technical advisory board of various colleges in India and Dubai, and is also associated with SciTech Center. She is a recognized guide for PhD in several universities and is a well sought after examiner for postgraduate theses. She's an invited speaker at various national and international seminars and symposia. Uh, in addition to all this, she is managing several societies. So she's a president of Control Release Society Indian chapter. She's co-chair of the AAPS Western India chapter, Mumbai Discussion Group, and being an alumnus of BCP and at the senior position, she's a president of the BCP Alumni Association. So we really, as I said earlier, have a very accomplished speaker. So over to Dr. Parizad to deliver her talk on innovation transformation. We are all eager to listen to you.
Thank you, Mala, for this kind introduction. And friends, just to inform you, Mala has been one of my professors and I have studied and learnt under her. So I do give some of the credit to what I am today to Mala as well. So thank you,
And,
Mala. Thank you. Thank you
and
very
Parizad,
much.
yeah, I will just add, Parizad is a very good friend, and I seek her advice on many issues with all her experience. Lot of, so I think it is mutual. Thank you.
All right, thanks. So I'll start with sharing my screen. Okay. Right. So good afternoon, friends, whoever are attending this particular session, and thank you very much for being there. Normally, people say that post-lunch sessions, people tend to be drowsy with the stomach full, etc., etc. But I really love to give post-lunch sessions because the stomach is full and the mind is active. Secondly, I feel my presentations would add value and would be a dessert to the lunch, whatever lunch you would have had. So just starting with a bit of a disclaimer from my side. Whatever talk I'm giving today in this particular session is my own reading and personal experience that I'm planning to share. I have used a few slides where I have acknowledged the companies whose slides I have used. And on the other images which I have taken, they have been from online displays. So coming to our very first slide on innovation. So there are a number of definitions of innovation, but what I would like to say is it's the creation, development, and implementation of either a new product, process, or service. But the aim should be to increase the efficiency, the effectiveness, and the main important aspect is to have competitive advantage. Why? Because innovation is very, very critical for any business. It is a word which is on the lips of most of the CEOs who are talking in various seminars and symposia. They're gearing up people to carry out innovation, come up with innovative ideas. Not just that, it has become a buzzword even in all the possible business magazines. As you know, friends, business that fails to innovate are at a risk of death. And no one would like to see their own companies going that way. So innovation is a must, and especially in an industry like ours, the pharma industry, we do have to innovate and keep on moving ahead. So then what is the purpose of this particular innovation that we are talking of? The purpose is to come up with new ideas and technologies which will increase productivity and will generate greater output with the same input. This is very important because with innovativeness, we don't want the cost to skyrocket. We want to keep the cost same, but at the same time, improve upon the output, improve upon the technology so that we tend to recover our investments in a different manner rather than by just increasing costs. That means it would be implementing new ideas, improving services, or creating dynamic products. It can also act as a catalyst that can make the business grow and can help you adapt to new marketplaces. It's not just like restricting to India. Domestic market, you may innovate, put in something new, something different, and even go to the global markets. So this is the whole purpose of innovation that one wants and triggers to be carried out. So innovation, we say it normally begins with a challenge. Now, if you search online on the internet how to innovate, you will receive number of recommendations, number of write-ups on different ways of innovation can be carried out. However, innovation is fundamentally about solving problems and driven by three essentials that are applied in harmony. One is experience, second is reasoning, and third is creativity, which is the most important aspect of innovation. Creativity and experience combined together will really give an excellent output on the innovation front. However, we have a very big learning that it is challenges that frame opportunities, and opportunities give innovation. That's why we say every innovation starts with a challenging problem, and currently the problem at hand, the COVID-19 issues. We had innovation being done, fast track innovations. We had companies coming up with vaccines. Suddenly we landed up in a situation of black fungus. People started looking at big data that they had, doing data analytics, trying to look for molecules, whether we can be repurposed molecules, and came up with additional innovative ideas of how to treat those fungus. So these are the things when challenges come up, so do the opportunities arise. So this is what we are talking of innovation, and many a times we say innovation begins with challenges. Now coming to my next buzzword, that was transformation. Transformation is the act or a process of changing completely, that is bringing about a complete change. In my next slide, I will actually depict what is transformation, but what is the current scenario? These are the certain statements that we continuously hear in media, in press, that pharma is late to digital game, is trying to rush and catch up. Artificial intelligence 2020 is the future of drug discovery, is digitization graining and agent operations. But most important over here is what we see. Big data is transforming pharmaceutical industry. And this is where we are looking at transformation through data analytics, transformation through artificial intelligence, transformation through IoT. Can IoT help pharma? Yes, it can help in a number of ways. Where are we on our digital maturity? Digitization in pharma is the future of pharma industry. We find all these statements coming up in various media, but where are we actually in the various in evolution of industry? Starting from I1, which is industry 1, moving up to industry 2 to 3 to the final revolution of I4, which is the current revolution. And where is pharma industry today? We are still here at big data, data analytics. We are slowly moving towards Internet of Things, where all the equipments, instruments that we are working with in labs, in plants, are being grouped together through various softwares and covered up thoroughly through internet. So this is what it is, and slowly we are moving towards that. But coming towards digital revolution is the basic idea that one needs to go towards. And pharma industry is still at this stage. We need to still move up ahead. So industry 4 has already gone to the fourth industrial revolution with cognitive computing. And these are the levels at which we find industries like aeronautical industries, silicon industries, software industries. They have all reached those particular levels. Pharma, although in healthcare, it's still lagging a bit behind. So coming to digital transformation, we know we spend billions of dollars on R&D. But in 2020, there was a basic shift to the digital R&D. Why? Once again, thanks to COVID. Lot of digitization happened. Even today's session that I'm taking, it's nothing but a session which could be organized through webinars because of the digital transformation. We are not meeting in person, we are meeting over line, we are meeting digitally, and this is how we are presenting things as of today. So automation has been able to help a lot. There is leveraging of AI. AI is artificial intelligence. There is leveraging of all the data that we are collecting, which we call as data analytics. Why data analytics is finding a big requirement today is we generate lots and lots of data, and especially in pharma industry we always joke that more than the product, the volume of data that we generated is very, very high. Because for one particular batch that we make, imagine the amount of data that it has the complete testing, the certificate of analysis, and the release of each and every API and excipient that has gone into the product. It has had complete product details, how the batch was manufactured, when it was manufactured, the complete batch records, what additional items have gone into the batch, the complete in-process testing, the final batch testing, the final release, if that batch is put on stability, the stability data, the packing data, etc., etc., etc. So imagine like what happens to that data? We just collect it, we leave it. Data is useful only and only when we analyze the data. That data is converted into information, and that information becomes knowledge. And through that knowledge, you should apply it in order to have process improvement, product improvement, then and only then it really makes sense. So these all put together should be utilized to improve the decision-making process, which again is helpful with the advent of quality by design. In a way that artificial analysis and analytics contribute to better products and improvement foundations for design decisions. So this is very, very important as and when we are looking at digital transformation. Now, very often we find that people are synonymously using the words innovation and transformation. Now, innovation is innovation in any particular area, any particular field. Transformation is transforming the innovation or innovative ideas in something which is useful to the organization, something which can be commercialized, and something through which you can create more and more challenges for yourself so that you can go and innovate further. So we say that we know that innovation is occurring all around us, and in simple terms, it is finding new ways to improve or change something which is already existing. Innovation usually refers to the sudden spark or the creativity of the idea or the inception action that lead to implementing the spark into a company's strategy. Now, if you see the picture which I have presented over here, the brain is creating innovative ideas. Whereas futuristically, we will find one more picture, which I will depict later on. The brain is creative, transformative ideas through digitization. So how does an individual incorporate innovative and creative thinking in everyday, day-to-day life? Is it very tough? Because of this continuous fast-paced business environment, how can we put innovative into practice? The first point is very, very important. One needs to set aside some time to think. We have to find time or the headspace to think creatively. It can be very tough, but many companies have taken a conscious decision to allow some amount of time to their employees to think differently, and that, at least in our organization, we used to call it Operation Blue Sky. Why blue sky? We say sky is the limit. Just think differently and come up with any crazy idea that comes to your mind. We will debate, we will discuss, we will see if it can be implemented, and believe me, some excellent ideas came out of it. From what I understand, like Google last year gave one full day off in a week to their employees for critical thinking, for innovative thinking. You don't do any work on that day, just think and think differently. Think out of the box, come up with innovative ideas. The second point is encourage conversation and collaboration. So don't just keep your ideas to yourself, start discussing out. There are so many professional techniques that are available. It's not unusual for even the best employees and departments to hit a mental block at some stage or the other, or start churning out incremental variations on some ideas. This is why it is really worth having a group together and what we call as crowdsourcing creative ideas. from outside your department. So try to interact, try to work with people outside the department, try to get into a crowd and source out innovative ideas, and definitely some innovation will come through. The third point is embrace failure and encourage risk. This is something which we really need to put in practice. Many a times we punish failures. Many a times we punish people who have made mistakes. We reprimand them. We remove them from the jobs. No, encourage them. If you punish them futuristically, they will never ever be prepared to take any further risk. They will never ever gear up to think differently because they will always be scared of failure. In our organization, we had put in an award facility whereby which any innovative idea, whether it was successful or a failure, we used to reward the person who had come up with that particular idea. The next point is start small, but aim high. The words change and innovation can strike fear in the hearts of those who have become too comfortable in working with their routine. But for those who are hesitant about diving deep and starting small innovations, the ideas can be an excellent way to proceed forward. Think of the innovation as a small spectrum at one end and then go ahead with smaller incremental changes to go ahead to the final transformative innovation, which will be there at the other end of the spectrum. And if you take that path forward, you will definitely be able to succeed. The final point over here is engage the rest of the business. Don't keep your innovative ideas to yourself. You need to have the complete business involved. Say, for example, in our, I'm a basically hardcore R&D person at heart. If we have an innovative idea, we don't just stick to the R&D department, discuss within ourselves and say, oh, this is excellent idea. Why don't we implement it? Share this idea with the regulatory team, share this idea with the quality team. Most importantly, share this idea with the marketing team. Let the marketing also give you response and feedback on whether this idea will be feasible to market by them, whether they have any other additional points which they can add. Like say, for example, you have got a brilliant idea of making a syrup for pediatrics. Maybe marketing has a better idea of getting to you saying, look here, why do we make a syrup difficult to transport, difficult to dispense, difficult to fill? Why don't you make just a powder for suspension? Maybe quality will say, okay, if you make powder for suspension, please avoid these flavors because they had issues in the past of stability. So a lot of things will come in the picture. So if you have an idea and you want to take it to commercialization, please be sure that you are engaging the rest of the business and coming up with the best possible solution, right? So innovation is not always technology being used or created. It is what results from the technology and how you solve your pre-existing problems in a newly reimagined ways that benefits the organization. Coming to my next slide on innovation and transformation. Here is what we really called as transformation and from where the word transformation has come from. From a worm to a butterfly. What a transformation. What a beautiful transformation. But does it happen overnight? No. Please keep in mind that transformation is a time consuming process. This is the next slide or the next picture which I was talking about. Earlier, I showed a brain and I showed few ideas coming out of the brain. Here I'm showing a brain and I'm showing the transformation of an organic material into something which is absolutely inorganic and digitized. And a classical example of this I will be taking as one of the case studies, brain on a chip. Oh, what a transformation and what an innovation that is, right? So transformation is new for an adopting new technologies or adapting existing ones to achieve efficiencies in the business, using technology to improve what was once an analog process, what we are talking of here, into a digital process. In essence, it means a lot of automation, which could also involve robotics, and these things are on the way. This is my most favorite slide, and whatever presentations I make, I see to it that I do talk about this slide and incorporate it in some form or the other. So talking about innovation, innovation could start with solving a problem, a bright idea that comes to someone's mind, or you have a disease identified for which we want to develop a drug molecule. Now, this innovation, what I'm talking of, is specifically related to our industry. I want to develop a drug molecule. A disease has been identified, COVID-19. I need to make a vaccine for that. This is the problem of today. So let's go ahead and see how we do it. I know that I need a COVID vaccine. It has to act against the coronavirus. I know the coronavirus structure, which is there. You can put it into your system, and against that structure, you build a molecule which will be able to work against the structure, right? Once the molecule is built, you develop and synthesize it in the lab and carry out some preclinical studies. Once preclinicals are successful, you do formulation development. Whilst doing the formulation development, you file for an IND, that is innovative new drug application. This particular system is for US FDA. You file an IND with all the possible data, and once the IND is acceptable to them, they will give you approval to carry out human clinical trials. Human clinical trials done, you find a NDA of the formulation. INDs normally of the drug or the bulk drug or the API. NDA is for the formulation, and once the NDA is approved, you are allowed to market the product in the US. This whole system will take what, around 5 to 10 years, will take millions of dollars. And out of 1,000 odd molecules that you would have started looking at, you may have just one lead candidate or two lead candidates, which could have been successful in the preclinical stage, may fail later on, or may fail in clinical trials, or even if they have passed in clinical trials, difficult to formulate, stability is not achieved, you're not able to develop a good marketable product. It takes years to do it. And after you have achieved this, you are there on the market. What happens? Generics start developing the same product and they file an ANDA. They do bioequivalence studies against your product. And after a few years, they are on the market. So what do? Can you just sit tight? No, we cannot just sit tight. We look at novel delivery systems for that same drug. We look at maybe combination products with that particular drug. We develop super generics. We take FDA approval within 3 to 4 years and once again market the product. What happens after that? The generics are back. They will once again develop a generic product on your redeveloped or super generic or novel drug delivery, and they'll be back in the market to compete with you. Normally, branded products prices are high. As a rule of thumb, generics come at 80% of the price of the brand initially. But later on, as more and more generics come into the market, there is a price war and the price starts falling. And the main person who's losing out most is the innovator. What does he do? He starts looking at some new disease, new problem, solving the new problem, and again starts doing this exercise for some different molecules. So this is a cyclical process. It is going on an ongoing basis. And this is where R&Ds of major pharma companies are working. Now let's look at what's happening today. We want to shorten the development time. We want to have the best molecule identified at the beginning itself. We want to be sure that our preclinical testing or the human clinical trials don't fail. We want to have a good formulation, good stable formulation, which gives the required diso profile, which gives the required kinetics which are involved. And I want to do everything fast. Today, we have at our advantage through artificial intelligence, through modeling and simulation, through data analytics, lot of softwares which will help you in directly developing the molecule. You put the protein that you want to be targeted in the software will give you different options of the molecules that you need to develop. Not just that, for each of the option that they have come up with, they will also indicate whether there is toxicity or whether you want to improve efficacy or which molecule will have higher potency, which will have lower potency. It will also give you an option that, okay, fine, there is a methoxy group over here. If you want to improve the solubility, replace methoxy with hydroxy, it will be better. Apart from that, will also give you some indication about the toxicity profile of that particular molecule. So your preclinical testing either could be totally removed or it can be reduced, or if you go to still advanced stages of ex vivo testing, that is testing within the lab using tissue cultures, using organs, or now using organs on chip, your complete preclinical testing can really be avoided. So AI and machine learning through modeling and simulation will help you to explore the drug candidate faster for a specific target product profile, and will also help you to avoid complete animal studies, which will of course reduce the cost by almost 20%. This will improve the overall efficiencies of your target drug discovery, because under the current situation, almost 96% of the drugs that were earlier tested in animals, they start failing in clinical trials in humans. So it's sad to say that there is no proper correlation between the animals that we use for studying preclinicals, that is rats, mice, rabbits, dogs, to what actually is happening in humans and human clinical trials. So current systems of modeling and simulation and artificial intelligence plays a big role. Not just in this area, when even I'm developing the formulation, there are softwares which will also indicate to you that with this particular drug of this kinetics, this is the type of dissolution profile that you have to target. And for achieving this dissolution profile for this particular molecule, it will also propose a dissolution media, which is not just a dissolution media, but it is a biorelevant dissolution media, and doing dissolution profiling testing using that particular media and system, I'm quite sure that you will save a lot of money whilst doing your clinical trials, because you will be able to achieve the required predicted kinetics through this particular system. So you can imagine where we have reached with artificial intelligence and data analytics. This particular part which I'm talking about is through data analytics. Who creates artificial intelligence softwares? It's human mind. And from where does human mind get this information? It's through data analytics. So all the data that has been captured for molecules which are close to that particular molecule that you have developed are then systematically analyzed and a solution is brought up. And this is the solution is something which the software or the system will give you, and you will try and implement it. So that is with respect to developing your formulation. Now, when you are actually even submitting your data to the regulatory agencies, believe me, there are softwares even for that. There are softwares in which you just upload your data and information, and that software will pick up all the data that is required for submission, be it module 1, module 2, module 3, module 4, module 5 of the NDA or the ANDA that needs to be submitted to the regulatory agency. You don't have to do anything. But the data that you upload has to be systematically done, has to be in the required format. Normally it accepts PDF formats, so it has to be in that particular format. And it's a cakewalk for you to wrap up the submission and put it in. Imagine how much time can be saved. Huge amount of time. So what earlier used to take us 7 to 10 years, today we can do it in 2 to 3 years. So amount of time saved, amount of money saved, and today the success rate is much, much higher than what it was earlier. This is innovative transformation. This is digital transformation. Innovation does not just mean coming up with new molecule, new product. Innovation is overall delivery of something which is giving value, added value to the organization, right? So one part of it is what I talked of. There is another system which is coming in play, is direct translation of the drug from the lab to the patient. Avoid the preclinicals totally, go directly to the patient, and from a small set of patients, deliver directly to the patients in clinical practice and communities as a whole. Once again, over here, I come up with a classical example of our COVID-19 vaccine. Did we do animal studies? Not much. Did we do a lot of clinical trials? Not much. Very small clinical, patient-centric clinical studies were done and immediately given to the community at large to be delivered. Now the community gives feedback to the lab, saying these are the side effects which are being observed. This is the way it should have been done. mRNA has these problems. The storage, which was at earlier, I think earlier when Pfizer came up with the vaccine, they required -70 or -80 degrees storage. Now, slowly, they are doing more and more studies and they are coming up with a more reasonable storage conditions. So these are the things which come up. This is the latest example which I can quote, but some of the earlier examples are cases like minoxidil and aspirin. Minoxidil was a cardiovascular drug used as an antihypertensive. Today, it is being used for alopecia, people who lose hair. Why? Because when it was transferred from clinic to communities, they found that patients who were on minoxidil started growing hair. And then they considered, why not use the side effect of minoxidil as a beneficiary effect? And they went back to the lab, changed the formulation from oral to topical, again went to the clinic and came back to the market. Aspirin, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug previously used for fevers, body aches, etc. Today, any cardiac patient's medicine chest you see, there will be aspirin in the complete prescription as a blood thinner. Daily one aspirin, different types of doses, 25 milligram, 32 milligram, 84 milligram, totally different doses of aspirin in different formulations. Long acting, enteric release, extended release, and in certain cases, there are even aspirin formulations which are immediate release, dispersible aspirin. And from what I have been reading past couple of years back, it was also reported that patients who were on aspirin for years together were protected from cancer. Now imagine if this is proved through this particular translational research, what potential aspirin will have. Won't each and every one in the community want to take aspirin? Because who wants to suffer from cancer? No one. So this is how things work. This is what is innovation, and this is what is translation. So for translational product development, you drop the preclinicals in between. They are products which are already known. They are products which directly go to the clinical. They directly go to the human trials. And with some change, they are back to the bench. So this is what we call as translational product development. Now, this is all what I'm talking about is industry based. Coming to academia, because most of you all, I think, sitting over here today are from academics. So what are the innovative opportunities and how do you handle them in academics? I've put down a few points for you to ponder upon. Do we create in academics a sound hypothesis before undertaking any research? A hypothesis that yes, this can be translated or transferred for commercialization into the market. Do we work on areas of unmet need? This is very, very important, and I'll come to this point a bit later in few of my slides. If any one of you all can pick up research on unmet needs, it would be really great. Is the data created authentic, reliable, and most importantly, reproducible? Many a times we have seen that projects done with colleges, when we translate them into the labs in industry, reproducibility is almost nil. So we have to go back to the college, try to interact with them, see how things were done differently, and try to work out a solution whereby which we can translate whatever was done in the college into the labs in industry. Do we have good predictive clinical models for human diseases? If we don't, look out for people who have those and try to collaborate. This way, it will be really very helpful, not just for academics, not just for your students, but even industry as a whole. The students will learn, they will have an opportunity to go to industry and work in their labs. And at the same time, industry will learn what new research, what new development is happening in your labs. So be open to collaborative research if you do not have these very same predictive preclinical models within your lab. Can we ensure confidentiality of data by students working on the project? This is very, very key and very, very important. I will once again be talking about it in my last slide, where knowledge management is lost when people move away. This is something which is a pain because we have experienced that students who worked on our project, we may not have an opportunity to offer them placement in the same organization. They go and join different organization, and suddenly you find that whatever you had been working on, whatever you had spent years doing, whatever you had collaborated is being taken advantage by of by someone else. This is something which we need to be very, very careful about as and when we are having projects which are being done. Confidentiality has to be maintained between the professors and the students and the organizations who are collaborating with them. Are we having standard rules if we wish to collaborate with organizations? If you don't have, it's better to put them in place. Do we have ready drafts of confidentiality agreements or memorandum of understandings to share with industries if we are taking the projects to the industry? Can the intellectual property norms be set up upfront? Yes, we do it in industry. We are very, very strict and vigilant about it. How does it happen in colleges, in institutions, in academia? I think there are some gaps which need to be taken care of. Do we maintain logbooks for the innovation carried out? I don't expect academia to have very high-end softwares, but at least we can maintain logbooks in which the moment you think about an idea and you feel that this particular idea could be an IP, futuristically noted down in the logbook so that you can claim priority, prior art. In industry, we have softwares. We have high-end softwares in which we, hello, hello, I'm getting some disturbance in between. Can everyone put their mics off, please? Yeah, thank you. So there are softwares available in which you can immediately, the moment, the day, the hour you find something which is innovative, just upload it in the software. The software will itself record the date and the time and who has done it. So there is no issue as and when you are being challenged, you can prove your priority date, your priority concept, and you can gain rights to that particular IP. Do we have books for each and every instrument equipment to ensure data integrity? Once again, over here, industry has very high-end softwares driving the equipments, instruments, and all, but it's not required. What were we doing prior to that? We were maintaining lab notebooks, we were maintaining lab logbooks for the instruments and equipments, who has used it, when it was used, when the second person started using it, was it washed properly, like say for HPLC, was the complete washing cycle completed before the second person joined? Do we do interdisciplinary work? If yes, it has to be documented accordingly. How confident are we in translating the innovation? Just doing, as I said earlier, just doing innovation or innovating for the sake of it? No. Innovation will have value only and only when you translate it to commercialization. Are we participating in open innovations, crowdsourcing, supporting virtual R&Ds? These are very, very good ideas. And I think even this forum is a very good forum wherein all of you all have got together. Of course, there would have been discussions about each other ideas and whether any of you all can help each other. I'm talking to you today. If you need any help, support from me, I'm available. There are mentors available in your own institutes. They may be your alumni. You can easily approach them and take their mentorship. A lot of opportunities are there for open innovations. The last point is very, very important, is how conversant are we to the recent advancements in regulatory requirements in spite of all these requirements available online? Do we keep ourselves updated to what the regulatory wants? And the regulatory wants a lot of things. They need you to start with the need analysis, develop the concept, prove the concept, then go in for product development or process design. Sorry. Further do testing and evaluation of that, not just testing and evaluation. It should be done using a validated method. Commercial scale manufacture, you have to do scale up and tech transfers and again validate the method. And finally, full life cycle management of that particular innovation. I am using the word specifically innovation because it's an innovative idea which you have picked up and you are seeing it to the end of its life cycle. We need to be sure of what regulatory requirements we need to put in place. This is the complete cycle which I'm putting forward before you all. The first is ICH Q8 for the QBD requirements. Currently, you don't develop, but you design. You don't do product development, you do product design. You don't do process development, but you do process design. You don't do method development, you design a method. Everything to be done via QBD. Once you have those concepts, once you have understood those concepts, they are very, very easy. For everything, we use big, big terminologies, but believe me, these are all common sense things. It's very easy. I'm not going to talk to you about QBD here because that in itself is one very, very big topic, which would take almost maybe a couple of days to sit together, explain and see how to take QBD forward. But QBD is the essence right now of any developmental activity. PAT should be put in place, process analytical techniques and guidelines. And I have also provided the arrow heads from which stage to which stage each and every guideline is going to be effective. Quality risk management is something which you need to keep in mind. Whatever decisions you take, whatever design you develop, please analyze the risk and then put it into action. The next is pharmaceutical quality systems. We call them as quality management systems. Now, what we have in pharma is GMP or a GXP, good manufacturing practices or good documentation practices, good clinical practices. All these things will give us and ensure product quality. But it was found in the past that the product quality is not consistent. Why it is not consistent? Because it was mainly dependent upon the individual who was working on it. If a person X does the coating, oh, his coating is superb, and the end product you will get 99.99% yield. But if Y starts touching the product, you will get only 85% yield. Why? Yes, of course, coating is an art. But if you would have applied systems approach with everything documented, you can ensure the product quality even if person Y is doing it or person X is doing it. So systems requirement came into place somewhere in 2000s to early 2000, and we had the first systems approach, which was, we didn't have ICH at that time. So we went by ISO, International Standard Organization's quality management system. So we went ahead with ISO 9000 and put systems requirement in place, which required a lot of documentation to be done. It required documents to be created for creating documents and a whole gamut of requirements, even with respect to change control and SOPs and deviations and CAPAs and CAPA management. Everything has come into place under the pharmaceutical quality systems, whereby today we are able to ensure not just the product quality, but even the systems quality, which will be able to produce a quality product in a systematic manner. Batch upon batch, you will get the same yield. If you don't, then you have to stop and you have to carry out an investigation. Why not? You can't just say because a person's hand has changed, why it's not being repeated. And after the investigation, if you find that there is an issue, you have to take corrective and preventive actions. This is all the pharmaceutical quality systems is about. There are a few other guidelines which are with respect to drug substance life cycle management. 13 and 14 are the latest ones which have been put in place with respect to continuous manufacturing, which is the in thing today, which is revolutionizing the pharma manufacturing industry. And there is one now even on analytical process development. Till date, analytical process was not under any of the ICH guidelines. Now there is a guideline even for analytical process development. So it has become a totally holistic requirement. It's very important that even in academia, when you start your research, keep these things in mind and imbibe them within your research, so that later on you don't have to go back to the drawing board. Later on, people don't start asking you questions, why this was missed out, why this was left out, is this put in place? But you can offer it on a platter saying, this is the holistic thing which we have done, which we have developed. It's industry, come take it, it's ready for you. You know, that should be the way innovation should be carried out. Coming to the process of innovation transformation, we start with discovery to the pilot stage to the adaptation stage, and finally to a scale up where you can transform it directly to commercialization. But in doing that, the who that is required, the what that is required for each and every phase should be well understood. Under who, we need sponsors, we need finance guys, marketing guys, IT, legal, risk managers, various supporting committees. We need the complete team to be working with you. You have a project team which is handling the whole thing. Then and only then will you be able to be successful in fast tracking the innovation that has been put in place to final transformation. This is, I would say, more of an industry-based slide where you can see that under the discovery phase, we have so many departments who are involved. Along with them, we have these many molecules which are under scope of discovery, from the idea or an innovation we have to the launch of new product. It gets funneled down. And what we have actually based, finally optimized up to the launch is basically dependent on what would be best for the customer. So this is just a simple slide to show how industry does it. But I would still recommend that academia and industry should partner with each other. But whenever you are partnering, see to it that you are developing synergies and collaboration, and we are leaving our egos behind. My experience trying to get industry and academia together, I have always got entangled in egos on both sides. Industry will say, why should we bog down to them? We are industry. I need this. Whereas academia say, we are doing this, we think this is right. I'm the professor, I'm the head of the department, I know better. So please leave the egos behind, try to work hand in hand, collaborate, and definitely you will be successful in taking things forward. So taking things forward, what is the way forward? The way forward is try to adjust your curriculum and make it more practical based to industry requirements. And I'm seeing this happening because, as I also put it in my profile, that I am on the advisory board of quite a few colleges where they have come up with their curriculum, discussed with us, and have taken industry inputs. And they have not just taken industry inputs, they have implemented them. So I big thank you to academia for at least like making a beginning, and hopefully the students we get out now futuristically would be more industry oriented. Involvement of industry specialists by devising curriculum. This should not be a one-time activity that we did it 5 years back and then that same curriculum is going on. It should be an ongoing process because industry is moving at a much, much faster pace. Being in pharma industry, we are surprised how fast the digitization industry is moving ahead, how fast the software industry is moving ahead. If 2 years back I bought an AI software, today I find that they have the nth version with them. That fast they have moved ahead, and the nth version is much better than what the version I had, so I'm forced to buy the new version. So this is how fast the digitization world is moving ahead. I have to keep pace with that. I have to move equally fast. I hope and pray that academics will also catch up. So it is a very, very fast paced organization. And one more point I had included, which is already happening in the current scenario in this full week, that exposure to entrepreneurship is being, I think, taken by this particular session today morning. You must have had sessions on entrepreneurship. So this is becoming very, very important that we train our students even on entrepreneurship. Coming to industry exposure, yes, internships are there in place, but I feel we have failed miserably. I don't blame the academia. I think the industry has failed miserably in training the interns. It's a very, very bad state of affairs because interns are rarely exposed to R&D department due to confidentiality. Poor guys, they are really interested in knowing what's happening and how R&D functions. All we do is make them sit in our rooms, explain to them how they function, but we rarely allow them to go to the labs. Once again, the question of confidentiality comes up. Can we expect students to maintain confidentiality? So that question comes up, and that is the reason why industry does not does not allow interns to get into the R&D. In rare case scenarios, they rarely gain relevant practical knowledge. More rigorous controls now have to be maintained by the academia on industry. Academia should check and monitor with the industry whether the industry is gearing up and giving the required internship options that is in the interest of the students. Whether the key objectives are delivered during the internship, this is to be said by the industry. If you can get industry experienced teachers or professors to come and talk to your students to give lectures, it would be really good. Academia should invite industry professionals with the required subject knowledge and practical insights to talk to the students. And this should not be just a one-time thing. It should be done on a regular basis. Believe me, there would be industry experts who are very keen to come and teach the students, very keen to talk to the students, and take advantage of it during this pandemic where industry people don't have to travel. They just have to devote 1 hour maybe in a week or so to talk to your students, and they'll be very willing to do it. Another thing is starting up of incubation centers. There are a couple of incubation centers, but I think we need more where you can really work on the innovative ideas that you have. Each college cannot be expected to have scale up facilities or incubation facilities to check out their ideas. But I think if we can have more and more incubation centers, it would be really worthwhile. And last point on this particular slide is about the nodal agencies, where we expect third-party services to bring the industry and academia together on any of the key projects which either of them may have. And industry may have a project which they want to share with academia and get it done, or academia may have project which they want to commercialize. So I was saying that why look elsewhere? Why have nodal agencies? Start your own. Become an entrepreneur. Commercialize your own innovation. See to it that you benefit by yourself. But in doing that, you have to have the entrepreneurship and the commercial viability. I'm not an expert on that because I think in the morning you have had lectures on this. So I will skip the next few points because they would look very preliminary against what has already been talked about. But on my last point, if there is a need to collaborate, academics may approach industry or industry may approach academia either on a national or a domestic level or on an international or global level. I have seen many industries not working with colleges and institutes in India, but looking global. For example, even Serum Institute, which college did they collaborate with? Oxford University. They did not have anyone here in India to work with them. Have we ever thought of asking the reason why? This is my simple pictorial presentation of why and even my personal experience. If you go to a global academic college or institute or university, this first picture is what you will get. Completely wrapped up project with all what you need neatly packed up and documented and delivered to you on a platter. Whereas my experience with Indian academia, I'm very sorry to say, but please excuse me, we will be delivered a thali. We will get a big plate and we'll have portions of what is expected in small, small bowls. Remaining things you have to ask for. Okay, this method was developed. Have you validated it? Yeah, we have validated. Can we see the validated report, validation report? That time you will get the validation report. Then you will find that in the validation report, out of the 8 parameters, only 5 are done. Why are the other 2 not done? Oh, we did not have those impurities to do it. Why did you not tell us upfront? So these are the things. It's a scattered thali that you get. What do we need to do in order to get it on a platter? Please think about it. And as and when you have an industry project, please see to it that this is how you deliver the end product and not like this. And once again, I say I apologize that I'm very sorry that I'm talking on this behalf in this manner, but I felt I should share it with you because unless and until someone shares, there is no scope for improvement. A few critical examples of various startups. So many, 36 startups. Out of them, how many are pharma? Just one. Just one. Why? It's a point to ponder. Why are we as pharmacists not getting into startups? Innovation opportunities and industry demands. Few points. Artificial intelligence to fast track innovation. We talked about it. Application of big data or data analytics in research. We talked about it. Translational research. I talked about it. And it is a bench to bedside bridge. We need to bridge this gap and we need to take things forward and make it happen. So under translational research into a product that you want to develop, it goes from bench to bedside. Does it stop over there? No, it's a two-way process. You should be open to getting criticisms, to getting feedback from the bedside back onto the bench and be open to do further trials and improve upon it. I was talking about repurposing of drugs industry demands. Two examples I shared earlier. Aspirin was one amongst them. Sildenafil was the second. Two more examples, hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, both of them never thought of using for COVID, but were used in COVID. Hydroxychloroquine, antimalarial, was utilized in initial days for COVID. Ivermectin, which is a dewormer in veterinary practice, currently being used for treating COVID-19. Although WHO, I believe, has said that this is not the right drug to treat, but still, I think many doctors are prescribing it and they are getting good results, so the treatment continues. So what is drug repurposing? It's also known as drug repositioning, a drug development strategy predicted on the reuse of existing licensed drugs for new medical indications. In academia, keep a lookout, keep a watch. If you feel there is any particular drug where you have seen either a side effect or a adverse effect which can be translated into a positive therapeutic efficacy, use it, develop a new product, repurpose it, and there you are. It'll be a shorter route to innovation rather than looking for something totally new because the safety profile would have already been proven. What are the other additional opportunities one can look at? Accessibility and affordability of essential drugs, orphan drugs for rare disease patients. These are the patients or disease and disorders for which hardly anyone is working. And what is a rare disease? A rare disease is one where fewer than 2 lakh people to or 200,000 people are suffering from that particular disease. So look out for those diseases and see whether you are in a position to develop them. You will be able to fast track the approvals. There are 700 conditions which are affecting only 350 million people in the world. Only 400 out of them have treatments. Millions are still left without hope. Do your research, you will have data available, translate that data and carry on. Additional opportunities, advanced and targeted drug delivery, my favorite topic, advanced drug delivery systems. 3D printing, levetiracetam is the first drug which has been approved for 3D printing. Next point is 3D gel printing. You are 3D printing tablets, capsules, etc. But 3D gel printing for what? For organs. And they have 3D printed a heart. And they have also looked at transplanting that heart into a human body. From what I hear, they have also 3D printed a liver, and a very successful liver transplantation is already carried out. This is where we are moving towards. Personalized medicine instead of general treatment, a tailor-made treatment for each person through their individual reaction towards medicines, through their individual genome. This is where genetic science is advancing. Get into it. Look out for drugs for that, and that will be the way forward. So my advice is don't look for any project. Look for projects that can get you fast track approval. Look for projects which can help you to stand out of the crowd. Don't continue to work on projects where you were already working and you have been working since last 10, 12 years and you continue work on them. Be different, innovate and translate. I had mentioned about a couple of case studies which I'll be taking up. The first one is innovative transformation, organ on a chip, which is being developed by Emulate. I had attended one of the sessions with them. Beautiful translation, a brain on a chip. The past, they say, was static and a non-human body. The future or the next generation is modeling delivery integrated into the human body to the bench. And they have already made available liver, kidney, and intestine on a chip. Coming up in this particular year is brain, intestine, but the colonic region and lungs. And brain was the one which they had demonstrated for neurodegenerative diseases, where they moved from animal models to 2D cell culture to brain organized onto finally a brain chip. Not just a chip, but along with all the cellular elements, to the extent that you have various cellular structures of the brain like neurona, microglia, astrocytes, etc. in the top channel. They have a porous membrane in between, and then we have the endothelial cells and the bottom channel. And the moment the drug passes through this, you will be able to detect how the drug reacts, whether it can pass the blood-brain barrier or whether it gets taken up by all these cells, and how it will behave can be detected. And this was the summary slide that was presented, that we leveraged organ on a chip technology to develop novel human brain chip that recapitulates the complex neurovascular unit. Why they are using the brain? Because they felt that whatever drugs which were being developed for neuro disorders, the success rate was very, very poor, really very poor. So instead of going through the whole gamut and then finding out that in clinicals they are not successful, they find this is a better way of doing it. Coming to a second case study of innovative transformation of the GI tract. This is a human GI tract, and this is what we feel we can build. Various glass compartments, two first for the stomach, then for the small intestine, a little bit for the large intestine and colon. On the basis of this model, GastroPlus has built a complete advanced compartmental absorption and transit model, whereby which you have stomach and duodenum, and then you have jejunum 1, 2, ileum 1, 2, 3, cecum, and then finally ascending colon, and then it goes for excretion. Through each layer, you have unreleased drug which is passing, you have undissolved drug which is passing, and then you have the dissolved quantity of the drug which is passing. So there are three different stages in which the drug is present at any given point in the GI tract, and it's only from the dissolved drug that it gets absorbed through the gut wall into the bloodstream. Everywhere you can see arrows where equilibrium is getting established. Now what happens? It gets absorbed, it goes to the liver, and it also undergoes enterohepatic circulation. So from the liver, gallbladder, it's showing a enterohepatic circulation happening over here. But at the same time, how about the other organs? It also shows distribution to the other organs like brain, adipose tissue, muscle, and skin. And this whole system gives us a predictive model of absorption, distribution, metabolism, and excretion. You can preempt the kinetics of a particular molecule, and not just preempt the kinetics. There were instances where we could use this particular software even to get a bio waiver, that is, get away from doing bioequivalent studies and comparing it with the innovator by just doing dissolution in vitro and then putting in vitro data into the system, and the system will tell you, seeing the in vitro data, whether there is in vivo comparability or not. Beautiful. What a model. And these type of things we call modeling, and we call it simulation, because it is simulating what is there in the GI tract. So these were two case studies on the advancements which I wanted to talk about vis-a-vis the development side. I also mentioned ICH-Q9, risk-based decision making, and what we call as knowledge management. And this is a type of a helical structure which we have for risk and knowledge. They are interrelated. The risk is high But as more and more information becomes available to you, more and more data becomes available to you, it becomes, and you make convert that data into knowledge, the risk level goes down and your knowledge level goes up. And through the increasing knowledge that you can have process or product improvement. Now let's see a few case examples over here. Innovation. When you're introducing a novel new product or a technology or a new test method, you know hardly anything about it. You are innovating. The risk is high over here. You start working on that, the risk starts decreasing. You have more and more knowledge over there. The risk decreases further. And finally, when you find that the risk is almost nil, you launch the product to the market. This is risk-based approach, right? On the second product over here, say for example, uh, you know the risk, but you want to propose some changes. Maybe we can take a case in example of a bulk drug or an API that you are manufacturing an API and suddenly you find that during the process, the color has changed a bit. What do you do? Do you stop the process? You discard the API? Do you continue manufacturing? And you don't have a lot of data for that particular stage of manufacture. But common sense tells you from the temperature data that your limit for that particular temperature on that process was say around 40 to 60 degrees, and this batch ran very close to 60. It ran at 58 and you're finding some discoloration. Whereas earlier all batches were well around 50, 55. So this tells you through the data analytics. It doesn't require a big software to tell you, but it tells you through the data analytics that this 3 or 4 additional degrees of temperature may have caused this discoloration. So you make the batch at a slightly lower temperature. You reduce, I would say, the range and lower the upper limit to an extent whereby which you will not get discoloration. So this is a proposed change and you know the risk over here. So this is where this particular change that you have incorporated will be sitting over here on a risk-based decision making. Let's come somewhere over here. Technology transformation. You want to put in something new. It is at risk, but the risk is low because that particular technology is available, data is available for that, but you don't have knowledge for it because it's not implemented in your area. So the knowledge with you is limited. Say, for example, a new software or a new system or a new machine is coming in. The software is known to the company who is supplying to you. The machine is known to the company who is supplying to you. He will give you n number of examples of customers who have been using it. So the risk of implementing it in your company, the risk is low. But knowledge is zero for you. You don't have knowledge about it. You have to generate knowledge. So this is where technology transformation, where implementing a new software will come in, and you will not be going to this level with that until and unless you do your own validation, you generate your own data, and you have evaluated your own data through data analytics, right? So this is where technology transformation will fit in. Whereas over here, you have all the knowledge that you have generated. You have a lot of data coming in. And this case in example could be, say, for example, in a particular batch manufacturing process, you were sampling the tablets every 30 minutes. And you find that you have fully automated machines which can adjust itself if there is a weight variation. You have a fully automated machine which can adjust itself if it finds that there is some problem with the hardness. So these type of automated machines you have. Still, why do you need to do in-process testing every half an hour? Can we increase the gap? You check the data of that particular product, of those tablets which were manufactured on that machine for the last 3, 4, 5 years, or last full 1 year if it is a fast moving product, and you see whether you have been finding a lot of weight variation. If you feel that you hardly had any weight variation in it, on the basis of that data, justifying it at the lowest risk possible, yes, you can definitely increase your sampling time and proceed. Once you increase your sampling time, see how much wastage you can stop. Each time you sample, say 100 tablets, you can't put it back in the batch. You have to discard it. Each time you sample 100 tablets, your person is wasting his time in sampling it, going to the balance, weighing each individual tablets, checking the weight, reporting it, writing it down, signing it off, dating it. Once he has done his job, then QA person has to counter check. So QA person counter checks, carries out this activity, he signs it. Once that is done, the shop floor supervisor has to sign it off. So imagine how much time, energy, and wastage has stopped by this just simple decision of increasing the sampling time. It's an innovative idea, but can you do it directly? No. You can do it only on risk base if the risk is absolutely low and you have data to prove that the risk is low, not otherwise. Yeah, I hope we have been able to understand this particular thing. This is the latest in risk management. This is the latest in knowledge management, and I felt like I should share some of it so that you can build it into your projects as and when you are looking for adapting some of your innovative ideas to industry. Coming to knowledge transfer challenges, I did mention about knowledge leakage through people turnover, students having that knowledge, students having that information, students going away from the colleges and transferring the same knowledge and information through some other companies. It's not just for students, it's within the organizations also. A huge turnover is there, and those people who have left you go to other organizations, and they have actually, we have seen that they have fast tracked the development and maybe launched a particular product before you. There are instances where even quite a lot of your IP gets stolen. You may be developing and some intellectual property which you feel you will be patenting, but before you patent, someone else goes and patents it. You may claim priority, but if a person is smart, they will patent it in such a way that they will create some minor differentiation whereby which they will prove that theirs is not as close to what you have done. So you may also go ahead and get your patent, but you may be lagging behind in your activity and someone else will gain that knowledge and information beforehand. So be very, very careful in these knowledge transfer challenges. This can happen at any given point in time, either at the pharmaceutical development stage or tech transfer, even sometimes during commercial manufacture. We have seen employees going away with actual batch cards, actual batch records, and going and starting the same product somewhere else, or maybe becoming an entrepreneur and starting those same products themselves. This is knowledge transfer challenges and knowledge leakages, which one really needs to be very careful about, especially when you have industry academia collaborative projects, or even when you are becoming an entrepreneur, you yourself see to it that your employees don't treat you that way. So this thing has to be taught to the students even during their entrepreneurship level, that they have to protect their own interests, especially if there is innovation involved, there is transformation involved. See to it that your own interests are protected. So this is what I would like to say probably. My final slide, wishing you all the best for the coming up and innovative ideas which can be translated to commercialization. So friends, gaining a competitive technological advantage with transformation to artificial intelligence or robotics or simulations, etc., etc., it's not the future, it is now. It is today. Please start implementing it. If you need any help, this is my contact email ID and my phone number. I hope you I wouldn't say enjoyed my presentation, but I hope you all, what you can say, are close to me. You think on the lines that I've been talking about. And if there is any difference of opinion, please feel free to share. I'm here to learn from you as you all were here to learn from me. So thank you very much for this particular opportunity to talk to this particular group. And thanks for BCP for organizing this.
Thank you, Parizad, for this really wonderful talk.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think you have really done justice to the topic. You started with explaining what is innovation, what is transformation. You have spoken about translation. You've introduced one more word. You have spoken about how organizations can inculcate or encourage out of the box thinking by giving them some free time. You have then touched upon many of the pharmaceutical uh, points like ICH, PAT, all these have to be looked at when having an innovation. You have given very many examples, organ on chip, TNO, 3D gel, and the knowledge risk helix, which is really that both of them we have to balance hand in hand. Lastly, you have given a warning about knowledge leakage, how we should take care and ensure that our innovation is not lost. We need to be guarded about it. Okay. Thank you very much. Now, I think there are a few questions which I think you would be able to address. I think one is the first question is from Harita, who's from BCP. She says, thank you for the highly informative session. Could you throw some light on any specifications or restrictions for actives and excipients for 3D printing? You got the question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, 3D printing technology per se can be done, from what I understand, by different methods. So a few of them are using extrudates, some are using filaments to do 3D printing. The other day, I think one student had even presented 3D printing of pellets. So it all is dependent upon the type of technology that you are planning to use. So there is no particular rule of thumb whereby which we can say that this particular API or excipient can be used for 3D printing. The excipient, of course, API should not be very high dose. That one needs to take care of. 3D printing, you should not go for 500, 600 milligram dose products, because it's very difficult to print such high weight tablets or capsules. Even if the dose is high, then look for giving 2 tablets or 2 capsules. But there is no restriction on the specifications for the API or the excipients, except based on the technology which you are planning to use. Say, for example, if you are planning to use extrudates, then your excipients should help the API to be extruded out. If it doesn't allow the extrusion to happen, then it'll be very difficult to print in 3D format. So this is all I would like to say.
Yeah. The second question is from Deepanshu Rana. He says, thank you for the amazing session. Question is whether we can take approval for a product just by doing in silico model rather than in vivo and human trials.
Yes, you can. It's dependent upon the category of drug, whether it's class 1, class 2, class 3, or class 4. Till date, I have not seen any approval for class 4 molecules, but class 1 and 3 are very easy to get approval for by just doing in silico models. Class 2 studies are going on, and from what I believe, couple of molecules have been approved. My own experience, I can share. We had a class 3 molecule, an API, whose particle size was changed during the processing at the API person's end. And we were asked to repeat the biostudy. So it would be time consuming, and we didn't have neither the time luxury nor did we have the required funding to repeat a complete bio. We did in silico modeling. Those were the initial days. Of course, the first trial did not go through well and was not accepted by the FDA. They asked us to go back to the drawing board and some revalidation of the model, which we got the supplier of the software to do it. And they came with us for the next round of discussions with FDA. And ultimately, the product did get approval without conducting a repeat bio. So yes, it is acceptable, but it's all based on the class of API. Class 1 API easily you can get through. Class 3 is a bit difficult, but yes, not impossible. You can. 2 is under studies and 4 is definitely at a very preliminary stage. I hope you all understand the classification of the API. When I mentioned, I mean, whoever has raised this question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Next question is by Dr. Nilima Tombre. She says, thank you, madam, for the excellent session. Could you throw light on regulatory requirements for translational drug delivery systems?
Yeah. Regulatory requirements for translational would be similar to whatever the regulatory require. You mean what exactly you mean regulatory requirements? Is it the regulatory compliance requirement or the regulatory affairs or the submission requirements?
Yeah, Dr. Nilima.
So
Would
compliance
need
will
to,
be exactly the same as what we do for our regular products. But for regulatory submission requirements, you have to do the submission as per the 505(b)(2). So if you are aware of what is 505(b)(2), it has to be done as per that. Only the difference is that you don't submit any toxicity data. You can refer back to the toxicity data and the animal studies data as per what was submitted by the innovator or by you in the earlier submissions. You have to put in additional clinical data of the clinical translation from bench to the bedside. Otherwise, the complete module 3 will remain the same because that is the product data, right? So full module 3 remains the same. It's on the clinical front that there is a difference.
I don't see any more questions. Are there any questions? Would people like to ask directly? Anybody? You can unmute and ask if you don't want to type.
No, it's all compliments. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. I'll just check if.
I hope it was not very difficult, right?
No, I mean, at least I found it quite simple. Just trying to see if there are any more. I guess there are no more questions now.
No, no.
Okay. Now, I think many thanks, Parizad.
Thank you.
There are no more questions, and Vivek will take over now. Or
Yes, ma'am.
Dr.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Thank
you,
you,
Parizad.
Parizad ma'am. Thank you, Mala ma'am. I would now call upon Ujjwala Shinde ma'am to felicitate Parizad ma'am.
Wow.
Ma'am, over to you.
E-felicitation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Again, it
Yes.
is novel ideas.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Vivek, and thank you, Dr. Mala Madam, for chairing this session. And thank you, Dr. Parizad, for graciously accepting our invitation. Definitely, artificial intelligence-based technology is here to reshape, revitalize the technology domains of present, as you have rightly said, not future. You have put in perspective how important it is to be well versed with technologies of future to have thriving innovation-driven organization. Thanks once again for accepting our invitation. As a remembrance of our FDP, on behalf of organizing committee, we would like to virtually acknowledge you by, on behalf of our organizing committee, our research scholars, they have planted a sapling in BCP campus, the sapling of Ratrani. So
Oh,
please,
wow. I love it.
yeah.
Thank you so much. My favorite plant, Ratrani.
Yeah. So this is the theme of our FDP.
Wish it would give perfume out during the day also. Can we innovate so that it gives perfume during the day as well?
So whenever you come to BCP, please do visit. We'll show you where it is
Sure.
planted.
Sure. I would like to water it also.
Yeah, okay. You are very,
Thank you so much. Thank
thank you
you.
so much. Thank you.
Thank you.